Hey guys, what's up? It's the Culture Detective here investigating your favorite movies, and today I'm going to finally do a movie review on Oppenheimer, written and directed by Christopher Nolan. So right now it's 11 p.m. and about 9 hours ago, I and three of my friends, one from Malaysia, one from Taiwan, an American, watched Oppenheimer in IMAX in 70 millimeters. And it's the first time I've ever seen an IMAX film in 70 millimeters. I believe it's like my second time watching a film in IMAX, I think. I don't know. But yeah, this is very much the first time I watched an IMAX film in 70 millimeter, and it is written and directed by the legendary filmmaker Christopher Nolan. If you don't know who Christopher Nolan is, you are truly living under a rock. He is one of the most popular, well-known, talked about filmmakers of our generation. And I myself am very familiar with Christopher Nolan's work, even though I haven't finished his entire filmography. Aside from Insomnia and Following, I think I've seen every film he's made. First of all, films like Inception and The Dark Knight are literally my childhood. Even though watching them now, they may not be like the best film ever, but they just have an importance to me personally because these movies are the reason why I want to be a filmmaker in the first place, especially for Inception, which is still a 10 out of 10 in my opinion. One of the most imaginative, bold, exciting, exhilarating sci-fi, fantasy, dreamy movies of all times. It's just freaking awesome. And The Dark Knight, still my favorite comic book movie ever. Even after the release of Spider-Verse this year, I still think The Dark Knight is better. Let's be honest here. Then, of course, we have other amazing films like The Prestige, which is a very imaginative and incredibly suspenseful period piece about magician rivals. We have Interstellar, which is a beautiful, emotional venture into outer space and the fourth dimension. We have Memento, which is the first, or more like the second Nolan feature, and it is a very interesting way of telling a story. It is a neo noir that is very tightly packed, and I enjoyed it a lot. So, of course, even though a lot of film bros are all over Nolan, ooh, Nolan is so great, blah, 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 blah. And I myself try to, steer away from the film bro crowd. I myself still really like Nolan as a filmmaker. For his last two feature films, we are beginning to notice a shift in style. We have 2017's Dunkirk, which is Nolan's most artistic film at that point. His cold, icy, clock-ticking, time-segmented take on war film is really interesting. And then in 2020, we have the film Tenet. And even though Tenet is full of exposition and it has some of the flattest characters he's written, it's still really interesting. I still had a blast trying to figure out what the hell's going on. I myself still really enjoyed it. Another cool thing about Tenet is that Tenet is the first time I've ever invited a friend to hang out. Watching Tenet, yes. So it's still a pretty special movie in my heart. So obviously, Nolan is someone that I kind of look up to. However, in the last couple of years, I began to explore films and sort of put Nolan in the back burner. And so when he announced that Oppenheimer is coming out, honestly, I had zero expectations. I honestly expected Oppenheimer to be the most boring, the sleepiest Nolan film of all times. I honestly went in with really low expectations. And turns out everyone's saying it's the best Nolan film. Turns out everyone's exploding online, no pun intended, about how great this film is, how this is Nolan's best in terms of technical aspects and in terms of storytelling. It's Nolan's most majestic. And I was like, really? Really? And another reason why this film got hyped up so much is because of Barbenheimer. Again, of course. So Last week I watched Barbie, which I thought was pretty good, and I actually had the opportunity to watch Oppenheimer and Barbie on the same day, but I'm glad I didn't make that decision because Oppenheimer would definitely occupy my mind so much so that it would completely overshadow Barbie. So I'm glad I watched it separately. But in case I haven't mentioned, Oppenheimer is a biopic about J. Robert Oppenheimer, the inventor of the atomic bomb. And that's pretty much it. It's 3 hours long, and premise wise, this is easily Nolan's most straightforward film to date. And one really amazing thing about this film and the social impact of this film is that it is screened in IMAX 70 millimeters. And yes, Dunkirk is filmed in IMAX 70 mil, and Tenet is also filmed with the same camera. But for some reason, people only started this 17 millimeter craze with Oppenheimer. Lately in social media, people have been discussing what are the best formats to watch this film in. For some reason, it takes Nolan to be it takes all the way out of all the filmmakers. It's Nolan who's going to be the director who brings film back and make it cool and trendy. But yeah, in case you don't know, there are only 30 film theaters in the entire world that screens IMAX in 70 millimeters, and a good 2/3 of them are in the USA. There is not a single theater in the entire Asia or the Middle East or Africa or South America that can screen IMAX in 70 millimeter. And there's a whopping one theater in the entire continent of Europe, one, that can film IMAX in 70 millimeter, and it's in Prague, Czech Republic. So, yeah, and even in America, the entire East Coast only has 3 theaters that can do that. One in Pennsylvania, one in New York, and one in, I forgot, I think of Virginia or something. Does that count as East Coast? I don't know. Luckily enough, I live in LA right now, and in LA there are 2 IMAX theaters that can play 70 millimeter, and that is already the most in any city ever in the world, as expected, because LA is the city of filmmaking. And the 2 theaters is AMC Universal Studios and the Chinese Theater in Hollywood. And the theater I went to is the Chinese Theater. It's the first time I've ever been to this theater. It's really beautiful. It's really old school. It's really huge, and it's pretty fantastic, beautiful theater. It's between this and Million Dollar Theater. I think I like Million Dollar Theater a little more though. That one just looks so freaking epic. But anyways, I watched IMAX 70 millimeter on at the Chinese Theater. The ticket is $23.75, and it's easily one of the most expensive movie tickets I've ever purchased. I think the most expensive, actually. And was it worth it? I guess. Yeah. So let's talk about the technical aspects of this film first. First of all, the cinematography by Hoyte van Hoytema is really freaking good. The use of lighting and overexposure is amazing. There's also a lot of very shallow depth of field in this film, which I think is actually pretty gorgeous. A lot of soft focus here and there, which I myself am not a huge fan of, but I think it's used really well in this film in order to show the subjective mind of Oppenheimer. Ludwig Göransson's score is larger than life, very orchestral, definitely incredibly intense. I really like it. But for some reason, I think I'm in the minority here. While I enjoyed Oppenheimer overall, a lot of people are saying that this is one of the greatest films ever, that this is a masterpiece, that it's perfect. I don't think so. There are a number of things about this film that I'm not a particular huge fan of. First of all, the first 30 minutes, I did not enjoy it. It's really confusing. A lot of names are being thrown around that I just do not know. The editing is really fast. The first half an hour felt like one very long montage, and the film just keeps throwing the audience a bunch of lore and history, which makes this film very clunky and very dense. There's a lot of lore and a lot of history packed into 3 hours, and it is also emotionally and contextually very overwhelming. And given that the first 30 minutes, especially the first 30 minutes for some reason, it keeps jumping around. Just because it's a biopic doesn't mean Nolan's going to stop with his crazy time jumps, because you go to Oppenheimer when he's young and then he's old and a flashback within a flashback. Suddenly we jump to these insert shots and it's just all over the place. It's cool, but also I don't really follow it. It's not cool in a smart way. It's just cool but choppy and confusing. And then we have the dialogue issue. It's still an issue. Tenet has a huge sound mixing issue. It's a little better in Oppenheimer, but it's still an issue. I think I picked up about 85% of all the dialogue here. Either the music or the sound effects completely overshadow the dialogue, or characters are mumbling and I don't really know what they're saying, or they're using words and lingo that I am not very, very familiar with, and I'm not really sure what they're saying. So either way, I only picked up about 85% of the dialogue. Maybe it's because I'm not a native American English speaker. I don't know, but I just did not pick up all the dialogue, and it made it even more confusing. Essentially, with this film, it expects you to hop onto a super speed bullet train, and if you're on the train, then you're on for an epic ride. If you're not, then you'll just get lost. And that's exactly what this film is, especially given the fact that this film overused music. I usually don't like films that have music in every single scene. Maybe I've watched too many art house films lately, but I prefer films that use music sparingly. So again, with this film, it tries to overwhelm you with all this music and dialogue and all this exposition and history and lore. And if you're hooked, you'll be on a journey. For me, half and half. Another thing is there are some nudity scenes in this film with Florence Pugh being naked, which I think is which I commend her, but also I don't think it's really necessary. But my major issue with that one scene is her reading a book, and the book is in Sanskrit, and she's like, "Can you read this?" And Oppenheimer was like, "I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." And it's just like one of those moments where it's like, oh my god, he said the thing, oh my god. It's like that scene in Bohemian Rhapsody where the members of Queen were like stomping the floor and clapping, and we're like, oh my god, this is like, we will. It's so, okay, I get it. They did the thing. He said the thing. It's kind of on the nose. But I guess the most annoying thing about this film is the aspect ratios. It keeps changing. It's so freaking obnoxious. I don't see the point in that. It's not saying anything. It's not artistically interesting. It's just constantly changing from 1.43 to 1 IMAX 70mm ratio to, I don't even know what's the 1.9 to 1. It just keeps jumping back and forth in the same scene, as if the color to black and white transitions aren't confusing enough. And I don't mind the color to black and white changing. I think it's a little distracting, but it does serve a purpose, because black and white is subjective Oppenheimer, or color is subjective Oppenheimer. Black and white is objective. But the aspect ratio changing is just so freaking obnoxious. Now that is as far as the cons go. What are the pros? First of all, let's talk about two scenes that I absolutely love. First of all is the Trinity bomb test scene. That scene is, I think, the biggest scene in the whole film. There's an explosion, and it's not CGI, it's real. The build-up, the shaking of the fingers is just absolutely suspenseful, and then we're hit with this dead silence, and it's gorgeous, it's beautiful, and then we are hit with the incredibly noisy, groundbreaking, crumbling shockwave. I could feel my seat and the entire theater just shaking because it's so bassy and so loud, and it was an experience. I'm really glad I watched it on a big screen, because if I watched it on a laptop with earphones, it just would be underwhelming. Then the talk scene afterwards, where Oppenheimer had to give a talk in front of a bunch of very patriotic crowds, and in his head he saw the crowd blowing up and turning into burn victims. That was very traumatizing. And I really like that. We really get into his mind. I really like that Nolan is trying something a little trippier. There's a scene where Oppenheimer was being interrogated about his sex life, and then as the camera pans and a subject crosses the camera, Oppenheimer becomes naked, which is a really interesting artistic choice, and I really like that Nolan is trying something different. Another thing is the actors and the cameos. Every actor did an amazing job. Cillian Murphy, amazing. Emily Blunt, the accent is not 100% great, but she did a good job. Robert Downey Jr. is really great. Matt Damon did a good job. Benny Safdie did a good job. And then you get all these other actors that I completely did not expect them to show up. Jack Quaid, you may know him from The Boys. Alex Wolff, you may know him from Hereditary. David Desmalchian, who is in a bunch of movies like Dune, and I mean, he's worked with Nolan before. Casey Affleck is in this movie for like 2 scenes. Rami Malek is in this movie for 3 scenes. Josh Peck from Drake and Josh. And Gary Oldman, who is in this movie for 1 scene, but was amazing because it's Gary freaking Oldman. The use of sound was fantastic as well. Again, this movie is loud as hell, and all for the right reasons. I really love it. You know, it reminds me of the screaming monolith scene in 2001: Space Odyssey. One of the reasons why that scene was so good was because it's hurting the eardrums of the audience, and I like that shit. I really enjoyed it. And I just really like the overall idea of this movie. It's a 3-hour long biopic. Usually, I'm not a big fan of biopics, but Nolan really gives his all on this film. And it's bold, it's ambitious, it's incredibly grandiose. I really like it. And I guess this is also Nolan's most humane film to date. After the cold, icy Tenet, Nolan did something completely in the opposite direction, and he delivered, which is really great. I just think that it's a bit of a shame that Act 2 is the best act, which is weird. Usually films aren't like that. Usually Act 2 is the weakest, but for some reason this film, Act 2, is the best one. And then the final hour with the revenge thing, it could be more interesting. I didn't think of Robert Downey Jr. and Oppenheimer as rivals or straws. I didn't think of them as rivals, but apparently they're supposed to be. I didn't really think that. So I wish they would have established that a lot better. And also I wish this film is more traumatizing, is all. I just wish it's more traumatizing. Maybe this film would make a great double feature with Grave of the Fireflies, but yeah, still a really good movie. It's taking a lot of time for me to digest it. There are good elements, there are bad elements, but the good elements sort of outshine the bad elements. And I think I will have to rewatch this for sure. But for now, I think this is pretty good, and I don't think it's that great or anything, but I enjoyed it. Is it a little overrated? Yes, but still really good. Feeling a light to decent 8 out of 10 for Oppenheimer. So, have you seen Oppenheimer? Comments below, let me know. Subscribe if you want more, and thanks for watching.